Hello, world, and welcome to our live stream. I'm Aaron.
I'm Garrett.
And today we're joined by Jake Cohen here to talk with us all about his Kickstarter, Astounding Tales. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Hey, guys. And also, I just want to mention Ray Griffith. He's my collaborator. He's the artist, so definitely can't make it happen without him, or else it would just be like Pac-Man and stick figures. That's the only two things I could do. So it'd be a story.
Don't I know it? So you're the writer on the project, and Raymond's the artist. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself personally? Now, I know you've got two guinea pigs, one named Victor Von Doom and the other named Barristan Selmy, right?
Yes. So unfortunately, I don't want to start things on a downer, but Victor Von Doom's brother, Peter Porker, passed away in December. And guinea pigs are very social animals, and also, unfortunately, Victor Von Doom is a little older and a little ornery, so he doesn't like people too much. So he needed,
I get that,
a companion. So that's where little Barristan Selmy comes in. He's his new brother and new cage mate. Oh, sorry about that. That's actually the delivery guy. So sorry about that, guys. Well, I guess piggybacking into kind of a little bit about me and my bio and whatnot. I live alone, so and the guinea pigs can't really get the door. So, being when there's a buzzer at my apartment building, I need to let the guy in. There's no one else to take that job.
Fair enough. So, where are you from?
Long Island. I live in Long Beach,
Long Island?
I live in Long Beach, New York, for like the past 3-4 years, and I was born and raised in Merrick, New York, so South Shore, Nassau County.
Yep, I grew up in Lindenhurst.
Oh, okay. So yes, very close.
I'm a Manhattan native myself, so we're all former New Yorkers.
Except for me, I'm a Connecticut native.
We kind of moved into his neck of the woods.
Or what? The New England part of Connecticut or the tri-state area part of Connecticut?
New England. I'm right outside of Hartford.
Yeah,
nobody's
right
perfect. All right.
We're up by Massachusetts.
But
I did a lot of comic book shopping in my youth at St. Mark's Comics. Yeah, that's where I like this. I guess most kind of people my age and older, the smell of old comics. It's like St. Mark's Comics is where I was introduced to the that weird musty
tactile,
old paper newsprint aging smell.
I used to love that smell, but now it kills me. All of the dust. This guy, he brought back a giant stack of old comics and was like, "Check this out!" And I was like,
"Oh yes." If they could put that in a candle, I feel like Gwyneth Paltrow, more power to her. But maybe we could get the old comic candle. Might be a nice addition. And I guess in general, at comic stores, most of the ones, I guess I haven't been in many lately, but just like in general, they seem to be like a lot nicer and better lit. And I guess with also not a lot of back issues and the better paper quality, that smell doesn't really exist in the modern comic book store.
Sure.
Neither does St. Mark's Comics.
Yeah, that was also, I don't want to get too inside baseball, in terms of New York, but slowly, all the kind of cool stores leaving, St. Mark's, I feel, is one of the latter kind of holdouts. First, there was Kim's Video left, and then
I'm going to ask you how you got into comics, but first, I want to ask you why comics. You're a comic book creator now. So other than the fact that you can't tell sci-fi stories like the one that you have on Kickstarter in a different medium without a large budget, say a movie or animation or something like that, what is it about sequential art storytelling that drew you to the medium?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. That I do enjoy visual storytelling. I'm actually in grad school right now for film theory. So I definitely have an interest in kind of visual storytelling. But then when you go into kind of having a limitless budget, then you get into the world of comic books. And then also in terms of just storytelling in general, and myself enjoying being or attempting to be a storyteller, just really frankly, kind of putting it on Front Street, it's easier for me to kind of describe a story to Ray, to help him give all the tools, all the literary tools to get him to help him, assist him in kind of telling a story visually through sequential art, is easier than actually writing a novel, because I don't really have to worry about like grammar and syntax. I'm telling a story to Ray, and then helping him kind of the inner psychology, the plots, all the literary elements that go into storytelling, kind of helping providing that to him so he could tell a story through sequential art. And that's not being humble. It's just, that's a lot harder.
We know.
It's a lot harder to write a novel than to like tell a buddy like, hey, this happens. And then wouldn't it be cool if this happens? And then like, you know, finding the room for the not so much the word bubbles, but kind of the panels and narration. Cause I grew up with like Claremont's XMen. So Astounding Tales definitely has like the Claremontian, like purple prose narrator, but like, you got to find space for it too. So like that's kind of his challenge in this whole process.
The first thing that I learned when I was writing for Garrett was when I structure out a page, because I do write a script, and even though we like work on it very closely together and talk about it and set up, you know, pages, I still write it out. When I was first structuring pages, I was not really aware of the amount of space necessary for word bubbles.
Neither was I, though. I as an artist, that was a hard thing to learn.
I had to learn how to cut down everything that I was saying into as few words as possible, because you want to, you know, get the point across, but also contain the word bubbles so that it doesn't overpower the art. It's an interesting ratio.
Well, I found myself now, and I don't know if you guys find yourselves doing this, when I read a comic now, I'm actually counting like word bubbles and things like that, especially when it's like going back to like a cool comic I like or admire. I'm actually like counting, you know, word bubbles and words and weird things like that. Yeah.
One thing that we're kind of doing is we share like a core collection of comics that we want to evoke. And so like, you know, if we're having trouble figuring out the panel count or how much we can put on a page, we'll actually just reference other books and say, hey, what's worked in the past? If, you know, they can get away with having this much dialogue, you know, Garrett, you can figure out a way to balance this, figure out how to make the equation work and make it look good.
Yeah, so. I have 2 Bibles on my desk now. It's just as reference material, because not actual Bibles, comic book Bibles, other than the Scott McCloud books, 2 actual graphic novels that the 2 of us really admire, so that I can try and get an idea for panel composition. Because if you look back at some of the Golden Age stuff, and I was just looking at the old Avengers comics and marveling at how this was true in the 9 grid that they used to do, the panels were pretty much all the same size, split down the middle of the page into like groups of 6. Occasionally you'd have like a wide across the middle or across the bottom panel, but none of these dynamic panel compositions that you get later in comic books. And I was looking at these pages, I was like, these are kind of boring panels, and the way that the narrative flows between them, they're all sectioned off. The dialogue boxes don't really pop out or connect them at all. So like learning that part of the dynamism of the storytelling is definitely a acquired skill. So let me ask you, how did you get into comic books? And what I mean is, like, clearly you're a comic book aficionado, having hung out down in St. Mark's Comics and enjoying comic books. What inspired you? Which artists and writers drew you into comic books?
Okay, well, the first comics like I ever owned, I was probably 6 or 7 for birthday gift. I was given, I don't know if you guys remember, they were like silver Marvel Masterworks, not the trade paperbacks, but actually like single issue, like gray outlined. It was Fantastic Four #1, and then XMen #1, Kirby and Lee. And then, so that was like my first introduction to comics. And then the first comic I ever bought was maybe like a year or 2 later. This is still when you could buy like comic books at your, like, you know, your 7-Eleven, your drugstore. So it was like a local smoke shop. It was Uncanny 270 something. It was when they went to get Colossus's brother in like another dimension or something. And they're like, the cover is like, it's either like Portasio or Lee on the cover. And they're like, it's like a dimensional portal. And they're all like, there's all these like energy and like they're flying through a portal. And I've just loved comics and movies kind of my whole life. In terms of being aware of like comics creators, like I was always aware that like there's this guy Stan Lee. Like even before I was aware of like how you would break up jobs or whatever, like his name's always on the front, or the inside cover when you're looking at the breakdown of jobs. And I was aware that like when I read old comics, especially like old Marvel comics, that the name Kirby was always going to be like in the beginning of that. So that was like my first, and then I'm trying to think of the first like creators. Well, Claremont's XMen has been since I was a kid till the present day in terms of like superhero comics, like monthly superhero comics. Like that's definitely my Jimmy Jam. But kind of like a lot of the usual suspects for someone my age. Gaiman, Moore, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, like the more Swamp Thing, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Why the Last Man, like I said, like all the kind of cliche stuff for a dude my age. But what really inspired me to do Astounding Tales was I was reading a Kirby biography this past summer. And you could probably tell from the litany of books I kind of just rattled off that, and kind of my age, that definitely from that era of kind of deconstructing the genre and like, what if these characters were real, and like urban gritty takes and like kind of stuff like that. And all that stuff is awesome. I grew up with that stuff. It's wonderful. But in terms of just like, there's different takes you could have on a genre. You could have a deconstructionist take. You could have a parody, whatever. I decided I want to do a kind of earnest take on the genre. So it's really kind of the story is a contemporary story in a contemporary setting in Astounding Tales, but it is an homage to those like early Silver Age books of Stan and Jack. So
yeah,
it's
really, I believe it's like when I was reading the campaign, it's like the book is advertised as a 24-page love letter to kind of golden age nostalgia, evoking works by Kirby, Ditko, Schuster. Yeah. But given a modern sheen and set in a world where the laws of physics don't matter quite as much as the rule of cool. And rule of cool is his domain very much. So we're looking forward to this book. We have a big thing on the show about bionics and cyborgs and androids and mechas and robots of all shapes and sizes. That's kind of our Jimmy Jam. So when we caught sight of this campaign, I was like, we're going in on this. We got to talk to this guy and we got to back the campaign. So before we get into Astounding Tales, let me ask you more about how you got your start. When did you decide you wanted to become a creator in comic books? And how'd you do that?
Yeah, well, definitely, I'd say for like the last maybe 5-6 years or so, I've really started to write a lot more fiction. I kind of have a background in film theory, so writing kind of nonfiction, like academic stuff, but still, it's a lot more fun than most things to, write about films and stuff like that. And then I had the opportunity from my brother-in-law, who's a doctor of geology at the University of Wisconsin. Hey, Dr. Steve Myers, what's up?
Shout out to the family.
Even though he does like a lot of like amazing like research into like global warming and stuff like that, he is really enthusiastic about getting people kind of scientifically literate. So he actually teaches like the intro to like the undergrad intro to geo class at the University of Wisconsin. And one of the ways he uses multimedia to interact with the students and get them excited about science and stuff like that. And one of the ways was a comic book. So kind of the MacGuffin of this comic was this thing called the Anoxic event. And it's like this crazy geological event that is one of the ways like we know the age of the earth and like the fossil record and all this like stuff that's like way over my head. But that was the first comic that I wrote that like actually got published, not just like I don't know if we could curse. Can I say shits and giggles?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you already did.
It's like it's a script that actually got drawn and like people read and stuff. It wasn't just like a script I wrote for shits and giggles. Or like over the years I've submitted Future Shock submissions to 2000 AD, like 4-pagers. So that was my first published work, and that was like 2-3 years ago, and that was a lot of fun. And then I guess right as the pandemic was hitting, I had a 4-pager that I was going to send to 2000 AD, and they put up on their site that due to the pandemic, we're no longer accepting 4-page submissions.
Yep.
So I had a 4-page script that I was kind of into. Went on Reddit to Comic Collabs, got in touch with Ray. We vibed, got the 4 pages that actually expanded into 5 pages because he was really inspired to do a splash page. So we did that as a 5-pager, and that's what issue 0 is. And then we're like, hey, man, you want to do a full comic? And then we did a Kickstarter and kind of hit our goal.
Here you are.
Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, like, here I am talking to you guys.
Very
Crazy
cool.
world, you know?
So how did you and Ray hook up? You mentioned a Reddit called Comic Collaborators.
Oh, yeah. So that was on Subreddit, the Comic Collab subreddit, I just posted, hey, I'm looking to commission 4 pages. Checked out a bunch of links by different artists and really liked Ray, and kind of took it from there. You know, commissioned the 5 pages. I think we work well together. I hope he enjoys working with me. I think he enjoys working with me.
So let's talk more about Astounding Tales.
Okay, cool.
You've got monsters, high-tech androids, kind of a golden age nostalgia package, wrapping it all up. How do you establish the universe? What's in universe? Like, what do you have?
Oh, okay. So we're definitely using kind of standard kind of tropes in terms of like golden, silver age, that it's taking place mostly in Cleveland, but we're in very short order. We start kind of going around the globe in our stories, but issue 0 starts to take place in Cleveland, just because I needed some place where there is like deep sea drilling, which there happens to be in the Great Lakes. Doing my research, I found that out. And then also being like kind of a nice homage, like where the fathers of Superman came from, in terms of like Siegel and Schuster, like setting it in Cleveland. And then also narratively for issue 0, I wanted some place that the suburbs start like very quickly after the city, just kind of narratively kind of where the bus gets attacked by the monster. And then in terms of like kind of the other tropes we're using, like you mentioned kaiju and like super science, androids and stuff like that, is essentially kind of where our conversation started in terms of like, it's a comic. Like,
Yep.
Why not? And also in terms of just the genre we're operating in, it's not necessarily even like a genre mashup. It's just like, why aren't I using like the tools in my toolkit? Like, not like there's like a line producer saying like, oh, do you know how much that monster, like someone's
Exactly.
gonna have to,
That's the benefit of working in comic books as opposed to film. You just kind of have an unlimited budget when it comes to the page. Maybe not, the artist, but to what you can show on the page, any type of high science. This feels very kind of heavily influenced by Astro Boy and Battle Angel Alita, and the character Billy's the character. Yeah. She's definitely got like an exciting young personality where she's, figuring out who she is and how to become a hero. You have the start of like a great journey ahead of her. You have a significant friendship that she has to maintain her humanity. So you definitely have a lot of like subtext and story built into just the 5-page teaser that you give, which is really exciting. Have you played a lot of like, I don't know, Mega Man, or do you read comics about androids?
Well, so it's interesting kind of with the you mentioned subtext, definitely going for that on purpose in terms of like Silver Age Marvel comics. It kind of strikes me as weird when people are like, I don't want politics in my comics. And we're not hitting anyone over the head with like philosophy or kind of politics or whatever. But it's kind of like baked into the genre when you start talking about these ideas.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned in the original 5-pager, man's insatiable need for fossil fuels is what wakes the kaiju. And I was going to ask you, is it like, as far as subtext? I mean, I guess we could just jump into this question now.
It's subtext that's so thick, it might as well be textual. Like that's
is there? Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like a lot of people bring their subtext to the text, and there are those moments of like, sometimes you wince at the, oh, I see that they're driving at something here, or in the case of the comic book, drilling for something. But are you intending to like juxtapose her high-tech android superpowers with her, most likely alternative fuel source with the more traditionally engineered low-tech stuff that can't save the world and is, run by fossil fuels? I think that's a very interesting theme to explore, and you're not doing it in too much of a heavy-handed way. I'm just wondering, is that something that you intend to like dive into? What themes are present?
I think in terms of like those themes, they come out in service of, or it's almost, once I have the narrative, or everything starts out as like a kernel, whether it's like a character, or just a line of dialogue, a setting I want to work in, and out of that kernel, just like a little bit of me inserted into it. Like, oh, we're going to have a monster erupt from the sea. So what's going to wake it up? Obviously in Godzilla, it's, nuclear testing or whatever. So it's baked into the thing. Like, it's like, I'm going to have a kaiju awakened. It's kind of part of the tropes. It's baked into it that like, that's just the current thing. Like, I could do like nuclear experimentation or whatever, but then it sort of becomes retro and old.
In the middle of Lake Erie, right?
Yeah, but just in terms of like, that would be a 50s thing. That would be the original Godzilla. That wouldn't be what the modern iteration of that would be. What's the modern iteration? Well, they happen to be doing it right now. And obviously, like, you could look on the news, unfortunately, throughout time, that like sometimes accidents happen. And because it's a comic book, like, it's not very fun to watch like Superman like scoop up oil.
Yeah, it's not an oil spill, it's a giant monster that's going to destroy civilization.
Yeah.
Dude, I dig it.
It's like, I'm not reinventing the wheel. Like, I'm just operating in these genres, and that's part of it.
So let me ask you, when it comes to like, tropes within the genre, Billy questions her humanity. In the bottom of the 5-page comic, I was like, I was surprised, overwhelmed, and pleased all kind of at the same time when she turns to her dad and goes, am I human? Am I real? Yeah. And I was like, that's fantastic, because you've got this young girl who's now an android, who's been effectively rebuilt by her father because her father didn't want to lose her daughter. And now you're questioning the existential reality of artificial intelligence and artificial life. And I'm like, how deep are you going to go with this?
Well, again, that goes back to kind of the now. So dealing in these genres, but so in 1961, it's like, what is radiation? Like, it's the Cold War, and that's of the now, or for then rather. So what's of the now for now is kind of dealing with technology and what is kind of agency, and that's kind of things like Blade Runner, things I grew up on. That just seems like the natural questions of kind of who has agency and what is human. And I mean, we all watched WandaVision, so it's not too much of like an esoteric reference. The ship, when you keep replacing every plank, is it still the original ship? When people are replacing parts of your body, or what makes us, us, all that information. So if you have all that information that makes us us, is it like the meat carrying case that like makes you? I'm not saying I know the answer, but these are just of the time, as opposed to when Stan and Jack were doing their thing, and it was, radiation would give you powers instead of cancer, or the golden age where it's like often magic. So it's kind of just, again, a modern.
So yeah, once again, like you said, it's born of the times, a sort of collective unconscious that's gnawing away on an issue like alternative energy, the threat of destroying the planet with fossil fuels, the nature of sentience, the forthcoming humanity of artificial intelligence, and stuff like that is within the collective unconscious of society. And so you're really using it as a springboard to tell a cool story about a robot girl. If we wanted to just reduce it down to its most basic, fun, like common denominator, lowest common denominator that appeals to the audience, while simultaneously having all of those deeper elements within it. I dig that. You know, I like the idea of you just telling a fun, cool story that's come to be because of these things that you're using to tell it. So, since I'm a sci-fi writer, you know, myself, there's always more to talk about when it comes to these things. In World, at least at the bottom of the 5-page issue, you say that you're going to reveal the origin of superheroes. So I guess there are superheroes in universe too for you.
Yes. I don't know how much, because I'm not
You
with
wanna
Ray, like
divulge?
how much I should give away with like what's in issue 1 and stuff like that.
You can
But-
leave it at just that's something I'm excited to play with.
Yeah, don't feel like you have to divulge anything to us, certainly. And
Well,
if you want it to
also
be
because
surprising,
I don't know how people feel like if people that would be consuming the comic or whatever.
Oh,
like
like
I'm the kind of
spoilers.
person, I don't care about spoilers. Like I just
me
like to hear
neither.
stories. I love
See,
trailers.
it's the film people that are like, I don't care about spoilers. I want to know the story. I want to talk about the thing. It's
Yeah,
I don't
so like
need to
I
be
would be cool
surprised.
telling you, I have an answer to that, like 100%. Like I just don't know if people would be like angry, like, hey man, I want to see Ray draw that answer instead of like Jake kind of like just kind of saying it, you know?
So I guess let's shift topics then. Why crowdfunding for your first go? You said you like submitted stories to 4-pagers to previous publications, and now you're doing it yourself. Why are you doing it through crowdfunding?
Just lack of resources. I wish I had a better answer, but we want to have the opportunity to actually do a print comic, and like a print color comic. So really, unfortunately, I wish I was independently wealthy enough that I could invest in something like that. But it's just unfortunately, a lack of resources. But fortunately, we live in an age where we could, crowdfund. And thankfully, it seems it's drawn enough interest that, knock on wood, like shortly, I don't want to count my chickens before they're hatched, but
you're at $3,700 over a $2,100 goal. I think your chickens are pretty safe.
Well, and you could see by the goal, it was pretty much just to cover, production costs, get it printed, and then obviously, the cost of the giveaways and the swag and all that,
Right. I mean, that's the fun part of the campaign, though, like the stretch goals and the goodies, the biddies that you put in everybody's bags.
Well, for me, it's kind of a weird situation. I don't know if you guys experience this, but a lot of the rewards and the goodies are, frankly, work for Ray, like designing posters and things like that. So I feel weird suggesting anything, because any of the suggestions, like 9 out of 10, is just literally work for Ray. Like, I think one of the things is like, I wrote a short story, or hey, you want to see my script? But all the suggestions. So like, I feel bad.
Hey, Garrett, I need you to design an STL file so that we can 3D print mechs. Go learn to model in STL.
Yes. So on one hand, I feel bad not giving as much input in terms of what the rewards are and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I don't want to suggest anything. It's like, hey man, you want to do more work?
So with crowdfunding, it was kind of a lack of funds. You guys wanted to put out a print book.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider like running the 5-pager, which you did give away for free, on Webtoons or something? Because I hear that a lot of people are starting to try and get their names out there by putting up their digital work on Webtoons.
I'm totally, I apologize, but kind of ignorant on that.
Dude, so will we. I mean, it's all trying to learn and, adopt new strategies. Like, I just heard about a Patreon model that people are thinking about implementing because crowdfunding might not be a sustainable practice in the near future.
And also, to be fair, I'm a total grumpus. I do not like web stuff. I think print media is like super important.
Well, I do think it changes.
Honestly, the right answer.
It's weird because it's still sequential storytelling to say it changes the medium. But when I mean medium, I mean like digital versus like analog. I do think, and that's why I like physical books in general, but especially comic books, the idea it's made to be flipped through, which is hard to do like digitally, especially we were talking about like something like Watchmen. Watchmen is definitely designed to be like, oh shit, and like flipping back and stuff like that, which is not. Yeah, it's a different experience. It's not like a good or bad. But it's like the medium's the message, type deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it loses some of that impact when you're scrolling through, as opposed to actually physically turning that page and getting hit with like some amazing plot point or a beautiful 2-pager or something
even
like that.
in something like Comixology, where you're clicking and you are side scrolling or you're going through guided view panel by panel, it still doesn't quite hold that same impact.
I agree.
Or if it was like something where you have to refer back like many pages, not just like flipping back. It's like, again, like a Watchmen thing, like chapters later, you're like, oh, wait, or like a repeating motif, like you notice the detail and you want to literally flip kind of, you can't.
Right, not easily.
Yeah, so it does change kind of that up a little bit. But also I wonder, like you mentioned, what was it called? Webtoons?
Webtoons, yeah.
Like I wonder, because actually, I was going to say I'm 37. I just turned 38. And I wonder if it's my age or I'm just out of it in general. Like regardless of age, like if I was 17, I still wouldn't be familiar with it. And now am I just like able to say like, oh, I think that's not really, maybe my nephew knows about that. Like, I don't know. So I wonder if Ray might be more like familiar.
He might be. I mean,
Sunday,
he has an Instagram.
Yeah, Sundays he does like the live drawing thing. It's like I believe it's called Funny Figs. So like I know he does like some streaming.
Yeah, I was going to ask him about Funny Figs LLC if he came on, but unfortunately he's not here to answer about his...
He's busy drawing.
He's busy or to answer about why he got kicked out of art class in the 3rd grade.
I'm sorry, you cannot see him for the next 20 to 30 days.
You've locked him away to finish the book.
Yeah. So again, the kind of the division of labor, I just try to be super appreciative. Like, I don't know, like, hey man, you want me to, dab that sweat off your brow? Like, need something cool to drink? Like,
let me feed you. Yeah. Let's prevent
that's
you.
pretty much
how we roll.
Garrett is drawing and flatting
while we chat. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, actually, you had like 115, I think, backers on the campaign. How did you develop a following and get that many people? 117. Hey, look, even more.
Yeah, it went up when I.
How did you get people following you that way if you weren't like out there promoting?
So Funny Figs is Ray's kind of caricature and illustration business, and he's kind of always much like myself, like a lifelong lover of comic books and always wanted to get into it. So he already had a little bit of a following through Funny Figs. And then the rest of it was just like on both our social media accounts promoting it. I don't know. I have nice family members, so I think,
bring up the,
I don't want to speak too kind of or boast or whatever, but I think that the Kickstarter page came out pretty well. I have to say, that's definitely a lot of, you could tell it because it's artwork. That's a lot is Ray on that as well. So again, and no false modesty on my
I gotta say the trailer probably grabbed me the most.
And his wife is the voice artist.
I was going to say, like, the voice matches so well, and you guys with the 5-pager, it was such an easy story for us to, like experience, go through, get a great idea of what the book was. It was succinct. I was like, okay, we're backing this right now.
People who are not familiar with comic books, I think sometimes think it's like false modesty on my part, where I'm like, no, really, like, yeah, I write these scripts, but like this dude is awesome. But like you guys obviously are super familiar with kind of the division of labor where you're like, yeah, like, hey, I took a week out of my day to write, a week out of my month to write this script.
I mean, at the same time, it's a lot of just mileage with my pen, right? But doing things without a writer I can't do it because there's so much work involved with trying to figure out what we're doing. And that's deceptive because you never see that. Because if I don't have context for what I'm drawing, it's like, okay, I could be doing anything.
Well, I think in general, we live in a world of expertise. Like, I think if you lived like 200, 300 years ago on like your farm, you're kind of like a jack of all trades. But like, if my car breaks down, like I go to the mechanic, like, unless I want, a comic full of like wieners, stick figures, and Pac-Men, Like, I need an artist.
He could
and
draw
then, like,
that too.
But I mean, like part of the thing too is that I mean, like I could draw any level of content, right? I could do something that's very simple, not very explored. But because Aaron puts so much time into figuring out the world we've got, it demands a much higher level of comic.
You did the same thing though when you wrote yours. You did research.
Exactly.
You thought about where you wanted to place the characters and the environments you wanted to put them. Like the scene with the school bus, you know, you wanted them on that school bus. You communicated yellow school bus, city street,
Oh yeah,
giant,
like
big building. So you knew the environment that you were creating, and you had a sequence of events with important plot points that you wanted to hit, and you communicated that, and the artist was free to go to town to show those points however they wanted to.
So I guess this boils down to, like, as a writer, don't sell yourself short on what you're doing. Absolutely not.
I appreciate that. You could pick out like Byrne Claremont comics where the descriptions, like the narrations and stuff, aren't matching up the image. So like, I don't want it too overly malign, like the Rob Liefelds of the world, of being like, fuck it, I don't need a writer, I'm going to draw whatever I want. That's always happened in comics. There's Kirby Lee comics where it's like, if you read closely, like this caption and this picture don't match. I think in the popular arts we have a bad habit of kind of taking away the wrong lessons, and always like trying to create this narrative of like the one creative genius, and that leads to like overkill. That, oh my god, everyone's coming to these X books for this art, it's got to be all the artists, and the art is amazing and the people are buying the books because of the artists, but like, hey, wouldn't they be tempered and like make better comics? There's like an editor, and it's kind of like with Kirby, that he has this amazing oeuvre of like amazing creation, but like I'm not going to say how much input Stan had in the plot, but in terms of his most commercial success, Stan kind of being an editor and kind of someone reining in Jack a little bit. It's made, in terms of, and I think even something like Star Wars, the narrative of like George Lucas is this amazing, he's the genius that did everything. And then when it's only George Lucas left to his own devices, you get episode 1. That like maybe Marshall Lucas deserves a little more credit. That like,
maybe he could have used an editor.
Yeah, that like, hey, Rob Liefeld, maybe listen to Louise Simonson. Maybe she does have something. Maybe you don't have to listen to all her suggestions, but maybe she can help you tell a better story or comic or whatever. I think that's kind of the lesson I see throughout comics a lot, is people having a particular expertise or a particular strong suit, and then them kind of like, I think Jim Shooter's a good example of someone who like could get the trains running on time and had a good business acumen, but does not mean he like can necessarily write super, like, you know what I mean? That like,
yeah.
He was hired at like what, 16 to write for Marvel though? Like,
or like younger, I think younger. Like 13, 14, he's writing
something like that. He just started writing comics as a teenager, and then he was like, no, screw it, I don't like you, I'm leaving for this other studio. And then he came back and ran the place.
To bring it back to the 90s, like, you're not going to ask Steve Kerr to like, dunk the ball and score you 30. Like, he's going to shoot threes for you. And that like, everyone needs to kind of help each other, put each other in a position to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of instances in comics for a variety of reasons. And some of the motivations could be completely legitimate. Like, I think Jack felt like, I need to be the writer so I can finally get credit. That unless I'm the writer, people like Stan Lee are going to take way too much credit. But I think the lesson also is that like, hey, a little bit of editorial and a little bit of help on the writing end is when he's making his best work. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, as far as credit and stuff too, a lot of people work on books. Yeah, it's the writer and the artist primarily generating the product, but you've got to have a good editor, to help you see the forest for the trees sometimes, because you get wrapped up in your own storytelling. Your letterer is a big part of it. Alternate cover artists. A lot of people go into making a property. That's why there's a huge push right now to put the letterer's name on the front of the book along with the other guys.
Hell, shout out to Frequency Girl, just somebody who's keeping your production schedule on
herding
fucking
cats.
line, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Seriously.
Well, that was Jim Shooter. So.
Somebody's helping marketing and just keeping people on track.
We live in a Steve Jobs world, right? There's a genius that did it all. When it's like, I don't know if that's, and that's just like I guess a convenient narrative, or I don't know. I'm not going to make assumptions of why that narrative exists, but we definitely live in a world of like the singular creative genius, when that's like mostly not the case.
Yeah, when it really takes a whole bunch of people working together with their own individual creative specialties to make this thing whole and complete and as wonderful as it is or could be.
Yeah, I guess it's like a super stew. Not everyone could be the beef, but you need the potatoes and the onions and all of that too, you know?
Man's making food analogies. Right up my alley. There we go.
Do you think that 10 years from now, the way we look back, I mean, it's been 30 years. Oh my God, am I old?
But don't worry, as in Astounding Tales, we can upload ourselves to bodies that will work.
Right? So looking back on the way we look back on X-Force with a fondness for the sheer shenanigans of the era and how over the top and just kind of bad and out of taste the era was. Do you think 20 years from now we're going to look back on the comic books of this era and be like, what were we thinking?
Well, I think genres, and this is like regardless of medium, genres go through different cycles. Like they start up straight up, earnest stories of the takes on the genre. Then it goes to parody. Then it goes to like deconstructionist, and then back around to like earnest. So I think in general, there's always like a looking back upon previous stories. There's a nostalgia, and then genres move in cycles regardless. It's hard to say what will be the kind of the takeaways in terms of like overindulgences of the era. I guess maybe like the kind of Bendis word balloons is kind of something that's kind of, and even that's now kind of dated, but that's maybe kind of this era of comics. I don't read a huge amount of like current superhero books to know what like the current kind of like cliches are. I do have to say though that in terms of like the early to mid 90s X books, I kind of look back upon those and kind of lament on what could have been, because in terms of like, so Claremont leaves because essentially editorial's like, hey, we're going with these artists are selling a huge number of books, but then we know what they didn't know at the time is those artists will shortly leave to go found Image. So now you're without the artist and you're without Claremont. So to me, it's like the beginning of the end of like great X-Men comics. So like that's kind of they're the bummer for me. It's like in sports you always see like what could have been, and to me that's kind of that era is like the beginning of the end of like, oh, what could have been, like what didn't we get, and because of what we know now. And it's not their fault, they don't know what we know now, but I do.
Yeah, I hear you with the what didn't we get. And they definitely did stumble and drop the ball, but I think they
didn't know what we know now. Like, how did they know that Image Comics was going to be a thing? Like,
they didn't. I mean, they should have. They absolutely should have known that Image was going to be a thing, because creators were grumbling and being sick and tired of not owning their IPs, their original characters, and receiving royalties, but rather being paid per issue, and Marvel keeping all of the rights. I mean, it was a huge point of contention after the Shooter days, when creators were like, hey, we want to own our stuff.
I didn't notice it as a kid, but now as an adult,
we didn't, because we were kids.
How much of the art was like reproduced of like, there's that, I think it's the Art Adams like Wolverine pose that was like reproduced on like a million posters. It's like on a Nintendo game. Yep. And there's like a bunch of Jim Lee art where it's like literally like the art put on like a million other
McFarlane did it with Spawn and Spider-Man, and you've seen a number of different like repositions. But Disney used to do it too. They entire animation sequences because it's just cheaper to recycle the old modeling and posing and just recolor it and do reline than it is to come up with an entirely new format.
But then you see kind of short-sighted that like, hey man, like you might want to let this guy like wet his beak a little bit, or he's gonna go just like take his toys and go home and like make another company, instead of like, giving them a little bit of the money, they're like, screw it, we'll just make our own company and keep all the money.
Yeah, which of course, I mean, Image was wildly successful in its own right, but then it became overly successful and bloated, and they could have used a Jim Shooter to come in and be like, no more new titles. No, you don't get paid unless you're on time and you turn in quality work. No, you're fired. like a shooter who just couldn't care, but they didn't really have a head dude because it was kind of a collective. It was McFarlane, Silvestri, and Larson, and Liefeld and Lee. They all kind of like made this beautiful co-op, but there was no one person at the top who could just smack him down and be like, no, that's stupid. We're not doing it.
Yeah, I guess it's and I do have a little bit of a background in team sports and stuff like that. Putting people in a position to succeed, using all your parts. Like some people are great athletes that can do it all, but there's like a lot of people, especially, college sports, and then just go down the rank to like the lower levels where it's like, hey, this person may not be able to do everything. The Steve Kerrs and the John Paxtons of the world, that like you could fulfill a role for us. And that like, I think in the popular arts is, the same thing, that like, maximizing the tools in your toolkit, and like get the trains running on time, like, hey, Jim or whoever, let's say Rob Liefeld may not be the best guy to like make sure the trains are running on time. Like that's why you need a Jim Shooter. But on the other hand, like Jim, like, let's not make these like editorial fiats and like telling the writers what to do. That might not be like, your thing. And not to kind of beat a dead horse, but again, like that's the history I feel you learn from comics is when you try to do it all is kind of when you start dropping balls, that you need kind of putting people in a position to succeed, letting people kind of do their thing, let them take the ball and run with it,
Yeah.
So I guess the last couple, this was a great conversation. Last couple of things I got to know, other than how you grew your following, which seems to be completely organic and just through word
organic
of mouth.
is a really kind way to put it. I thought you were going to say
hate that word because growing a following is not the same as growing a head of lettuce. You know what I mean? Like it's not organic, but it is in a way it's natural and I guess miraculous.
Well, I have to say lettuce. Ray is definitely much better in terms of marketing. I guess for better or worse, to me, the marketing of the book is kind of the same as the creation of the book. It's kind of like an honest expression. Like this is the thing. That's what it's about. This is me and Ray. And like, if that, is your jam, if that blows your hair back, like, cool. Like we would love to like show it to you and even offer it for money that we could use in exchange for goods and services. But like, I guess in a lot of ways, like I'm kind of a crappy salesman because like, it just, again, like storytelling, it's just like an honest expression. It is, so kind of, I guess our marketing or the marketing on my end is kind of the same way. I guess organic is a nice way to put it.
Do you want to take a look at the trailer before we wrap up? Let's take a look at the trailer real quick.
Yeah, okay. It's fantastic.
Should I add you to the...
No, I have it.
Okay.
Ready?
Cool.
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Billy Potts. I just moved to a new city yesterday with my dad, and I think my first day went pretty well, even though half the city was destroyed. My dad keeps telling me change is a part of life. I've been going through a lot of changes lately, starting in a new middle school, meeting new friends, and finding out that after a tragic accident, my father transferred my consciousness into an android prosthetic body. Other than getting me picked first in kickball, my super strong android body helps me defend the city from all kinds of threats. I was a bit surprised how often Cleveland comes under attack, but as my best friend and expert in comics and science fiction Jack explained, any major metropolitan center always has its fair share of super science-related carnage. But personally, I think he needs to spend less time on the internet. From everyone at Astounding Tales, thanks for stopping by, and I hope I'll see you again in the pages of Astounding Tales Issue 1.
Coming to Kickstarter, March 1st.
That's just such a fun trailer. I can't stress enough how important a trailer is.
Well, much props to Ray and his wife is Billy there, and I do have to say though she does have the voice of an adult. She was I guess I don't know what the word, pitching her voice higher to make it sound younger. She actually does sound like an adult woman in real life.
No, I think she nailed the voice acting on that. It was a perfect kind of like this girl's a new high schooler. But there's also monsters in town. Like,
well, definitely, yeah.
It was the perfect kind of like tongue in cheek. I loved it.
Yeah, again, like Silver Age Marvel, like This is Manhattan, and people live in it, and there happens to be
monsters.
To go for a Bronze Age example, like X Factor has a ship in the middle of Manhattan, but also like the streets, it's the real streets or architecture of the city or whatever.
It's funny. The one of my favorite bits of media is I love the Venture Brothers. I don't know if you've ever seen the cartoon Venture Brothers.
100%.
And one of the things I like about that is that it is a look on old school kind of 60s, 70s
pseudo
pulp
pulpy
action kind of stuff, but through a lens of people our age who are kind of
looking back,
a little bit jaded with things. So I appreciate that.
We definitely have. So how to describe it? Like in a lot of ways that's accurate, and then like in a lot of ways because it's more of Venture Brothers is a little more of a parody. Like
yes,
but
they
we
tip
definitely
their hand
much more
completely.
sarcastic. Yeah,
but the way we pull of like those tropes and those classic ideas, very much so in terms of like I remember those ideas.
It seems like
and
Amazing
things like
Tales runs on nostalgia.
Or Astounding Tales.
It runs off of
Close
nostalgia
enough.
and an appreciation for where we came from, and then a modernization of that. Then the appreciation of where we came from, and let's make fun of it because we're gonna kind of retell the past and
right
in looking back at where it failed. So are there any recommendations that you have to new creators out there who are just getting into comic books for the first time? I know it might be weird for you being that like this is absolutely your first time out the gate, but if whatever worked for you, what you feel helped contribute to this success, you could pass on to our younger viewers who know nothing about getting into this and really desperately want to become comic book creators.
In terms of like the actual process of making comics, or like the crowdfunding, or both?
Yes. Well, I mean, more the doing the comics, because the crowdfunding requires like a whole nother layer of intuitive understanding and marketing and branding and stuff that I couldn't do without frequency.
I guess from the comic creation part, if you're similar to myself, where you're a writer who is not really a good draftsman, because I guess anyone could create art in a literal sense, right? But if have aspirations to do like kind of sequential art or visual storytelling that's kind of beyond your artistic kind of capabilities as like a draftsman or whatever, that to keep writing, and because when you do get that opportunity to collaborate with an artist, like you want to be able to kind of rock and roll and hit the ground running, because let's be real that there is as we talked about a lot here in terms of the division of labor, that it's going to be harder for a writer who can't produce the art on their own to get to link up with an artist, especially if you've never been published, because you're an unknown quantity. It's in terms of going into a collaboration, they have to have some level of trust, because they're going to be the artist, because they're going to be doing so much more time labor. So be kind of ready to, when that collaboration happens, to kind of hit the ground running. Also, in terms of like being a storyteller, like I grew up reading comics, and I think kind of having a postmodern kind of view in terms of like art, in terms of there's no high or low art, that you want a good sampling of everything. So it doesn't mean that you should be some kind of like weird, elitist, pretentious person that only reads the great works. But at the same time, like, don't just read superhero comics, because there's a lot you can learn about narrative from all kinds of stuff. So whether they're myths, Victorian kind of era stuff. I mean, Alan Moore isn't making League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because he only reads DC superhero comics. You know what I mean? So probably a lot of the writers and artists that you love are pulling sources, from all kinds of things. Think about someone like Jack Kirby. He's not. There is no sources for him to pull from. He's whether it's films, books, whatever, like vary up kind of your ingesting of all different kind of mediums and stuff like that. And I guess write in different mediums too, I think is a benefit. I would say
that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Whether they're short story, like maybe not everyone's got like a novel in them, but short stories or even essays, just kind of working with your voice, because also in a comic book script, you're telling a story to someone. You're telling the story and then providing the tools for them to translate that story into pictures and words. It's like you need to be able to like communicate, you know. So maybe also for people, if you're like shy or whatever, or like don't dig like face-to-face communication, like, you know, this may be the medium for you because you could just type what you want to the artist, and you guys never have to talk in person ever. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my advice: is like consume as much and very different stories as possible. Doesn't mean you have to torture yourself with like the most weirdest esoteric things, but try to see different things. Go down the rabbit hole, the sources of like artists you like and like what they're into.
That's great advice.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
All right,
Sorry
man.
if I was
Thanks.
long-winded.
No, hey, we appreciate it. We like hearing from
I appreciate you
Is there
guys,
where can people find you? Where can people interact with you more?
Okay, so my Twitter is just at Jake Scott Cohen, one word, 2 T's and Scott, Jake Scott Cohen, and my Instagram is I believe it's _Jake_Cohen.
Right on.
Yeah, we're going to put links to your stuff in the description of the video so that people can find you, find the campaign, find Raymond and his Instagram.
Yeah, they'll definitely be able to find Ray through through my social media, and then kind of my social media is mostly just things about comics, things about lacrosse because I'm from Long Island and I'm like a walking, talking Long Island cliche. So comics, lacrosse, Star Trek, sci-fi, and my guinea pigs. That's kind of mostly what's on my.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I really dig it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys
Judge.
so much for helping get the word out there, guys.
Yeah,
Please.
absolutely. Our
pleasure.
I can't wait to see the book, to get our copy, and to have you and Raymond back on the show to talk about your great success.
When I let him out of the basement, when I unchain him, we'd love to be back on. Thanks a lot, guys.
Hey, no problem. All right. So don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and tune into the frequency.
See you next time.